And thanks everyone for being here with us today. And I also would like to thank ERF for taking up the effort to harmonize the data set and put it in the public domain for everyone to use. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that I'm here with you today. As Dr. Mai said, I'm going to be talking mainly, giving highlights about the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey with this presentation. So this is the overview of the presentation. What is the EIFBS? How the idea came about? What was the motivation behind collecting this data set? Who contributed to this output? And then potential research that can be done using this data set. And then I'm going to briefly talk about the modules of the data set and also very briefly talk about papers that have been published so far with the use of this data set.
And the results.
Very short. Okay. So as Dr. Maya has said, the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey is a unique data set of 2,383 Egyptian firms. The data were collected in November 2020 to February 2021, which marks the second wave of the COVID pandemic. The questionnaire includes 14 modules, which I will not talk about now because I will go a bit more into detail about them later. The data were collected through face-to-face interviews, and we administered 2 questionnaires, one for open firms, firms that are still in operation during the crisis, and another questionnaire which is very similar, only 4 modules of that questionnaire is different, for the firms that have closed or have temporarily shut down operations. From the 2,383 firms, we could only make 45 interviews with firms that have closed or were temporarily closed, but were able to also answer the survey. The representativeness of the data is representative by location, urban and rural Egypt, so lower and upper Egypt, governorates, and is representative by sector. The data are also representative of small and medium and large enterprises, so not micro enterprises. It is not representative of micro enterprises, although there are some micro enterprises in the data. It happens with some measurement errors, etc.
Micro being what size?
Micro is less than 5 workers. So we could also, if the data are not representative of micro enterprises, that means they also underrepresent informal firms. So they are not representative of informal firms, despite the fact that we have gotten already some interesting results pertaining to informality. So the background behind this survey, originally we wanted to collect firm-level data specifically to look at the different investment laws in Egypt and the different laws that govern the different firms. So we wanted to see how is the performance of firms that abide by the investment law number 8 in 1997 or the special economic zones law 2002, etc. That was the original idea behind collecting this data set, but then the pandemic came, and then we decided, okay, why not to look at the effects of the pandemic on the manufacturing sector in Egypt, plus doing what we had originally hoped to do. So as Dr. Maya has said, this survey has a wider significance because it sort of complements the demand side of the labor market that the series of Egyptian panel surveys, labor market panel surveys have gathered. We have 5 surveys in Egypt from 1988 to 2018. So this survey sort of provides the labor demand side, as the labor demand side remains systematically hidden in the Egyptian labor market panel surveys. And it distinguishes itself also from other surveys, such as the World Bank Enterprise Survey, by its richness and depth of information, by its national representativeness and detailed questions, that can be potentially a double-edged sword. So, but basically we built on these other surveys to deepen our analysis, especially during the COVID time. So the motivation, actually, I talked about the technicalities. The motivation was the Egyptian labor market panel survey. So it has been collected regularly since 1988 and has allowed lots of researchers to work on topics such as poverty, such as employment, social protection, wages, wage inequality, marriage, school-to-work transitions. And to the extent that, despite that, for instance, my specialization is industrial policy and industrial organization, I have worked on wage inequality simply because the data were out there and were of good quality. So it is important to have data to work with, and sometimes that affects even what you're actually working on. The ELMPS, there are heroes behind this ELMPS. Mai already mentioned. Raghi Asad is one of these heroes who has for years been the technical director for the Egyptian labor market panel surveys. He has closely worked with statistical office, the CAPMAS, to regularly update the survey, to discuss sampling, to supervise enumerators in the field, to be involved in data cleaning efforts with the help of many great researchers at ERF. So with ERF support, Raghi managed to ensure that the data are placed in the public domain to benefit generations of researchers who were previously data constrained, really. Raghi would have loved to be here today, but is not able to come, but he is also behind this survey and encouraging me and pushing me to get on with it. So I tried to follow Raghi's footsteps, and now I dream about implementing a second wave of the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey, so it doesn't just stop at this stage. So really, I take this open panel to request funds for the coming wave. The German Institute of Development and Sustainability has already provided the funding for the first wave. So I hope through, I call now for other funders to step in for the next phase of the survey. Okay, so who did what in this survey? How did this effort come about? So I personally have designed the 2 questionnaires, and I received continuous comments and support and lots of discussions with 2 very close people to me, Professor Mai Gadallah and Professor Shahir Zaki, who's talking the whole time. So these are mainly the 2 people who have stood behind me as I work on the surveys in designing them. Dr. Zakaria Osman, Professor of Statistics at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University, performed the sampling of the survey after long discussions also and frame complements. He could talk about these better than me later. I have also trained the enumerators, although that was done online because it was during COVID and we couldn't even travel anywhere. I checked the data after the pilot, got back to the survey company when there are problems, and then checked them again after the survey was finished. Again, the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, through the Ministry of BMZ, of international cooperation, the ministries of international cooperation through the MENA project of the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS. They have provided the funding for this survey and have thus pioneered this innovative and due effort in the region. Without this financial support, none of this would have been possible. I would also like to thank Marcus Löwe, who's the coordinator of the MENA project, and without also his agreement to conduct this survey, this wouldn't have taken place. And finally, ERF, in line with its outstanding commitment to disseminate data, has, of course, harmonized, anonymize this data set and put it in the public domain for everyone to benefit from it. This is a great public service, I would call it. So these are the people behind this work. Okay, so the data allow disaggregation by firm size, employment by gender, formality status, and many, many other characteristics of the firm. And since the survey was administered during the COVID crisis, the majority of modules include the information, or the people were asked questions to give information before the COVID crisis and after COVID crisis. So we basically, for most questions, have 2 points in time. And this allows, of course, the study of a number of issues around the effect on the COVID crisis, on firm resilience, on firm survival after COVID. And the data set generally enables the examination of a wide spectrum of issues pertaining to the goods market in Egypt, especially in the manufacturing sector. We can study production structures, productivity, firm transitions, labor demand, trade and global value chains, industrial zones, industrial policy, employment, profitability, technology, innovation, governance and institutions, laws, and government support, you name it. So a very large range of topics. These are the 14 modules. I will briefly go over each one very briefly. So the first one is the identification data, which gives the applicable law, which investment law does the firm follow, and which, is it the qualifying industrial zones law, is it a range of different laws that the firm can follow, the region, the industrial location. It gives, of course, the manufacturing sector, and we used ISIC revision 4 at the 2-digit level. We have a total of 33 sectors. It gives the commercial register, operating license of the firm, tax and regular accounting records, which enables us to infer the formality and informality status of the firm. Module number 2 deals with size and employment, so issued capital, firm size by number of employees at 3 points in time at the firm's establishment, before the COVID crisis and after the COVID crisis. Employment is disaggregated by gender, by formality status, by production, non-production workers, and by full-time and part-time employees. Module 3, closures and expectations. If the firm has closed during the COVID pandemic, temporary closures, permanent closures, length of closures, status in terms of operation, is it fully functioning, is it partially functioning, capacity utilization, and expectations regarding operation of the firm or exit for the coming period, whether it will be able to continue paying the wages of its workers, etc. And then module 4, documents changes in response to COVID, given in values prior and post-COVID. So what happened to your investment decisions, what happened to your production and your capacity utilization, to your exports, to your financial conditions, to your revenues and profits. Of course, firms gave values. We allowed the firm to give the value in Egyptian pounds or in dollar to make it easier for them. We don't know how much we can trust these, but something is better than nothing. Also change the numbers of workers in working hours and in working remotely, although that working remotely question, I have to say it didn't work that well. I think it wasn't asked properly, the wording, yeah. Module 5 gives the transmission channels of the COVID crisis, so perceptions of seriousness of each of the transmission channels of the COVID pandemic, given on a Likert scale from 0 to 10. 25 different transmission channels, including production-related, liquidity-related, financial, health, trade, logistics, administrative constraints during the COVID crisis, and then problems related to suppliers and clients. Module 6, ownership and management characteristics. The ownership, is it private, is it public, is it national, is it foreign? By gender, are there any women owners? Are there any women managers? And managers' educational levels. Chapter 7 gives innovation, so expenditure on R&D, type of R&D. Is it in machines? Is it in design? Is it in processes, etc.? What type of R&D? And which authorities or organizations have provided support towards that expenditure, whether government or private. 8 talks about management practices and the use of IT. So have managers been setting performance indicators? For instance, have they been setting production targets? Type and number of performance indicators? Promotion criteria, how are people inside the firm promoted, whether they are normal employees or managers? How are the firing practices? And then with technology, types of the technology that has been employed. Is the firm and its employees using computers? And if they are, to do what? Are they using the internet to do what? Do they do they have internal information link networks? Do they have quality control systems? And lots of information related to the use of IT and technology. Chapter 9 basically covers production costs, the total costs, and it disaggregates it by costs on energy, wages, land, rental, and inputs. Chapter 10 talks about obstacles to operation of the industrial firm. Also, perceptions are given on a Likert scale between 0 and 10. This is basically a module that is modified from the World Bank Enterprise Survey, but gives these perceptions before COVID and after COVID. So what changed after COVID in these obstacles of operation? Again, 25 types of obstacles, pre and post, pertaining to public goods, public transport, sewage, water, electricity, etc., road conditions, problems pre and post dealing with certain institutions, Ministry of the Environment, social solidarity, manpower, civil defense, Industrial Development Authority. I think this was a very interesting question. When I looked at it, I didn't write a paper on that, but I think a descriptive paper on this question could would be very useful. I think lots of firms, not going to reveal it now, but have problems with certain institutions in the country. We also asked about in that module about excellence in service provision, pre and post COVID. How did the Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Industry, Micro and Small and Medium Enterprise Development Authority, how do you rate their service levels, Federation of Egyptian Industries, technology centers, etc. Module 11 is one of the most complicated modules that has a lot of information, but was quite complicated, and in the next rounds, we will have to think of ways to streamline it and simplify it. So it mainly talks about global value chains, export activities, direct and indirect suppliers and clients of the firms, degree of dependence on a limited number of suppliers and clients, quantity and value of inputs, quantity and value of outputs, exports and sales, trading partners, if abroad, which country, if locally, which governorate compared to your governorate, and then whether a firm has a quality certification and what type of quality certification. 12 talked mainly about export obstacles, and it asked these questions to both exporters and non-exporters. Why are they not exporting, or why are they not exporting more than they are exporting? So is it your own productivity? Is your productivity low? Attractiveness of the captive domestic market is because there are so many, the tariffs are so high, so firms prefer the domestic market to venturing export markets. Technical barriers to trade, tariff barriers, etc. The types, the ports and airports the firm mainly deals with. Module 13 deals with worker training, whether the firm provides worker training. I am about to finish. No, it's only 14 modules. We are at 13. Yeah, it is to launch the. All right, so worker training, so whether the firm trains, who trains, is it inside the company, is it an independent expert, other companies, most important skills expected from the training and vision for future skills. The last module was on government support, pre and post-COVID, and it covers 14 types of government support, financial support, financial and technical support towards factors of production, renting land, production processes, or general financial support. And then the other type of support was particularly relevant to the COVID pandemic, which is the tax and loan-related exemptions and deferments support. So as Maya has mentioned, so far 6 papers came out of this data set. The first one here that will be within the coming days published in the Journal of Development Studies with Shahir Zaki, my great co-author. It's on the role of political connections in COVID-19 policy response, effectiveness of firm-level government support. This paper mainly shows that while smaller firms, younger firms, private firms, make more use of government support, they are the ones less likely to be receiving that support. And those firms with political connections, those are the ones likely to receive the support, although the effect of that support on them is quite minimal. So this is the main result of that paper. Another paper we wrote on storm survivors, evidence from firms in time of pandemic, which shows that the firms were less likely to close or to be partially functioning if they were using technology, if they were innovative, and if they have provided worker training compared to the other firms. So more the behavioral aspects of those firms. No, we're not.
I'd like you to go into some detail about what we are here to learn about, the results of this survey.
Okay, so the paper with Phoebe talks about the gender employment gap and has shown that, in fact, during COVID, the gender employment gap has declined. So it is a better thing. It was a better thing for women. There are nuances of what caused this effect, but this is what it is. Of course, there are mistakes, and we would learn from our mistakes for the coming, hopefully for the coming round. In the types of questions, especially the ranking questions, are too hard. Better to give the most important reason for not exporting, for instance, rather than tell them, give a list of reasons, the length of questions, and then removing abundant questions, and perhaps also removing abundant modules altogether. So as users, please give us your comments and suggestions for improvements, hopefully for the coming round, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heba. Thank you, Amirah, May, Dr. Amirah, and everyone. Good morning to all of you. I'm very happy to be here with you today to comment on a very important survey namely the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey. Conducting this survey on the industrial sector establishments in Egypt is a worthy cause because there are not so many surveys nowadays on the sector. This sector is a vibrant sector. Some of it is advanced, and therefore looking into the dynamics, the responses is rather important. And repeating the survey again, maybe after a year or 2 or 3, would be very valuable for decision makers and to understand what's happening in the market. As has been mentioned, maybe I don't know, she mentioned that this survey is based on a sample of the economic census survey as well as other surveys, as Dr. Amirah told me. And I'm not going to go into that. Maybe Dr. Magued would do a better job in this respect on the sampling, I'm not sure. However, I was asked to comment on the questionnaire form. Dr. Amirah had 2 questionnaire forms, one on the operating enterprises and the other one on the non-operating enterprises that were found, which were 45 enterprises. I'm not going to comment on the questionnaire number 2 because I didn't get it, but I'll comment on questionnaire 1 on the operating enterprises. Now, as I understand from the title of the questionnaire form, and I'll have to state here at the beginning that I only read the Arabic questionnaire form. I didn't go into the English questionnaire form. Why? Because the Arabic questionnaire form is the one that was implemented in the field. So you have to remember that. The main objective, it is called in Arabic مسح سلوك المنشأة الصناعية وسهولة التشغيل والإنتاج بعد أزمة COVID. This is the title in Arabic, and in English it's the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey. And I guess when Dr. Amirah spoke, I understood why is there a difference between the 2 titles, because I was not convinced to have an English title different from the Arabic title, both on the front page of the questionnaire form. Because at the beginning, I guess, as Dr. Amirah mentioned, it was thought of a firm behavior survey. And then when COVID happened, then why not ask about COVID as well? So this made me confused, actually, when I looked at the questions. Very confused. And I'll tell you why. Let me say at the beginning, before I go into the details, that designing a questionnaire form is an art. You have to imagine yourself sitting in front of the respondent and the flow of discussion, how it goes, how the flow of discussion goes. If I start by asking several questions about the main features of the enterprise, I have to go there first and then move to specific questions on the target, maybe here in this title, COVID, and the aftermath of COVID or the response of the enterprises to COVID. I remember when we did the micro and small enterprise survey, which has not been mentioned quite clearly here in the presentation of Dr. Gadallah. This survey was conducted in 2 years, 2003 and 2004, in 4 countries. So those are 8 surveys. Out of those 8 surveys, hundreds of papers were written, in the 4 countries. But I'm not going to go into this issue. I'm only going to go into an issue that I remember quite clearly. When we first wrote the questionnaire form, Dr. Heba hosted a conference. And in this conference, the main target was to look into the questionnaire, how solid it is, so who was invited to look into the questionnaire? Hernando de Soto, Donald Mead, Jacques Charm, Ferhad Mehran, Nader Fergani. I prepared the preliminary questionnaire and they all looked into, so you can imagine who looked into the questionnaire form. The tycoons in the field of micro and small enterprise. So, and it took a while to prepare the questionnaire. So that's why I'm saying it's an art that you will master. You will do that, I know, for sure. This is the number one. Number two, when I look at the questionnaire, I see it's a rather long questionnaire. It includes 14 sections, 360 main questions, 100 or more sub-questions, 42 identification questions. It's immense, it's immense. I mean, that's why I phoned Dr. Amirah and asked her, how long did it take to fill this questionnaire form? And then she told me it took a day or two, or maybe sometimes more than that. So the length of the questionnaire has its effect on the accuracy of the questionnaire and the concentration of both the interviewer and the respondent. So when the questionnaire is too long, then it tends to be very tiring to both persons. Now, I have some remarks on the questionnaire form itself, but I'm talking about the questionnaire form in Arabic because I was talking to Dr. Magued before we started, and then I saw a question, and I told him I don't get this question. The question says, what year did this enterprise start? So if you take the establishment, the economic census as your sample, all the enterprises in this survey, in the economic census, are established before the census, before 2017. But the question says, if the firm is established before 2018, it is written in the Arabic, close the question, stop questioning. So I was telling Dr. Magued, I'm surprised. He told me, yes, he was surprised as well, and that's why he went back to the English. But this is the Arabic questionnaire, Dr. Amirah. So, I mean, you have to take care, pay attention to that. Number two, some of the questions, the movements of the questions are not correct. Meaning, if you ask the person, when did you open, and then afterwards, it's question 1-9, and there are several options in the answers, and those options would lead you, and if not, move to another question, and the movement is not correct at all. So the movement, you have to review those movements, and I have written them to you, because they have to be corrected, or else it will lead to falsified knowledge. Now, after that, you move to the type of institution in question 113 to 119. You move to the type of institutional setup in which the firm operates. So you mentioned, is it a free zone? Is it an industrial city? Is it an economic zone? And then you distinguish between 3 economic zones. But you fail to mention, is it a specialized cluster, industrial cluster or not, which is very important. Because when the firm is operating in an industrial cluster, it makes a hell of a difference. It makes a difference in its linkages, in its connections, in its ability to export, So you have to add that, because you cannot leave it just like that. I guess those questions, 113 to 119, have to be rearranged completely. You have to add a question on the industrial clusters in the allocation of...
Zones are there.
No, industrial zone in cities. Like 6 October, this is not an industrial cluster, a specialized cluster. industrial specialized cluster is like Shobra al-Khema for textiles. It's like Al-Manasra for furniture and so on. So there are specialized industrial clusters, which are not the industrial cities. Industrial cities, you don't have specialization. You could have a textile industry beside a food industry together. So this is not specialized industrial cluster. So it has to be mentioned. And we did mention that you should look at the questionnaire form of our micro and small enterprises because it mentions it very clearly. Now, sometimes you put certain titles like شركة حكومي. There are no شركة حكومي. There are شركات قطاع عام or قطاع خاص. في شركات حكومية. في مؤسسات حكومية. So you have to remove that. Certain things that could be distorting the meaning and they do not exist actually. Now, in section 2 on the employment, there are several questions on the nature of work, like technical and non-technical, gender, formal, informal, and so on. You ask the respondent to tell you the number of, let us say, formal and informal workers in the company, in the firm. And then in the next question, you ask him to calculate the percentage of formal and informal. Why calculate? This could be done in office. I mean, why so many questions on calculations when you can do that very easy in the office and using the data that you have? So those are so many questions done like that. You have to eliminate them. You don't need them. In the same section on employment, there is a question on the number of workers at the start of the firm. I think there is no need for it. Some firms are 50 years old, some firms are 10 years old, and some firms are 3 or 4 years old. You don't need to compare, 40 years ago, how many workers, and most probably the managers now or the partner now doesn't know how many they were, مثلا 50 years ago. So, if you need to remove, there are certain remove questions. There are certain questions that are redundant and not useful at all. The section 3 on COVID is too long. It contains 12 questions. It could be abridged to 4 or 5 questions, no more than that. Okay? By the way, as I was listening to you, I remembered something. Section 3 is very long. You could make it shorter. And then you could add a component on the cost of COVID on the company. Meaning, did they have to have special precautions, health precautions? Was it costly for them? Things like that. COVID was related to certain, certain measures to be taken by companies. Were they able to do that, or they were not able to do that, and so on? You have a question that you mentioned did not get a good response for it, working online. I wrote it. Most of the industrial companies do not work online. They work because they produce goods. So work online in this respect is not, there are a lot of questions I can tell you that you have to remove, but the basis is good. You can, after removing all those redundant questions, you could do a very good job. Also, you asked the respondent to mention the percentage of hours reduction, Why not ask him, just ask him, how many hours on average did you used to work per week in 2019 and then in 2020? On average, that's enough. Don't ask the respondent to calculate anything, This is too much for him or her. And then there are 2 questions where the answer options are very vague. Let me give you an example. In question 413, you ask the respondents on the work, who are the workers that will not be re-employed re-employed afterwards, after the recovery. The answer options are really vague, Amirah. Now, what are the answers? He has to choose formal, informal, permanent, temporary, female, male, and so on. This answer does not lead to anything. This choice does not lead to anything. Suppose I reduce the number of workers in my company by 5 informal workers. When I bring them back, I might bring only 3 or 2. So the answer options that you give are very vague and they do not give the correct idea. It has to be changed. And the same applies to the fi'at al-ugur, the wage categories that will not be raised. And the same kind of answers that are really vague, ambiguous, do not give an answer to the question. Because no one decides not to raise all women. If I mark females, that means I'm not going to raise the wages of all women. This is not a good answer. To me, this is not an answer. The options have to be changed. Certain questions, like question 418, have to include does not apply. Certain questions have to include an option that means not applicable or does not apply. In question 418, you mix between the production and sales. You were asking about a question about production/sales. There are differences between production and sales. You could produce 100 units, but you could sell 80 only, or 70 only, or more than that, because sometimes you withdraw from the inventory. So you don't mix production with sales. They are not the same. In section 6 on education, some questions could have been merged. I'm not going to go into that, but I can tell you later on what could be merged. In section 11 بقى tired me. الحقيقة section 11 should be eliminated. On the feeding industries, yeah, it's important, but it could be reduced quite. For instance, when you ask the respondent, who are your main suppliers? What does it matter to me as a researcher?
Which set of questions?
Section 11.
Feeding industry.
Yeah. When you ask him, who are your main suppliers? Name 3 of your main suppliers. What interest does it mean to me to know who's supplying him? I mean, Amirah, this could be eliminated. These 2 questions on the suppliers, on whom you sell to, you have to look into that. It will help you, by the way. It will improve the quality of... Yes, exactly. Now, another, I'm very close to closing my remarks. The flow of the questions have to be revised. For instance, you start with the general sections on the enterprise, the features of the enterprise. Don't ask about the capital when it was established. It doesn't mean anything. A capital of a company 50 years ago that was 10,000 pounds doesn't mean anything today. But you ask about the present value of the capital. This is what you can ask about. What is the present value of your capital today? The flow of thought, the firm should have come first. I mean, questions 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11, those questions are on the firm. They have nothing to do with COVID. And then you could put the questions on COVID or whatever afterwards. The plan of the questionnaire form, the design of the questionnaire form has to be, if you're not going to go into COVID anymore, just remove the questions on COVID. I'm very close to. My suggestion is, this is a very rich data set. I'm very grateful to you because this is important what you did. If you're going to repeat it again, please revise the questionnaire, eliminate all the redundant questions that are not important. And I want to ask you again about, I mean, maybe Dr. Magued can go into that, the process of data collection, because this is a very long questionnaire. Were you there during the training of the...
It was COVID, so it was very hard.
Because the researcher has to be there, and has to supervise the implementation of the questionnaire, the survey. This is very important. Leaving it to a firm is not sufficient. Yeah, I mean, لا ماشي. يعني knowing what happens in the field tells us a lot, you know. You cannot trust those guys at all. Really, I mean it. You have to have the data collectors, the supervisors, and another group to inspect around them, to look around them and see what they are doing and go back to them and see, you know. You cannot just let it كده to a company. At the end of my remarks, I congratulate Amirah and May for their work, for the idea. I hope it will be repeated. I hope this, and I'm sure you will revise the questionnaire form. And best of luck, because we need such surveys in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this conference, and especially in this session. Actually, the organizers of the conference asked me to comment on the Open Access Microdata Initiative, which to me is very dear to my heart. Actually, I started a similar initiative when I was in IDSC several years ago. It failed. So I'm very happy that this model is working. Actually, at that time, we were that, as Dr. Mai mentioned, that the data will not disappear or will not, will be maintained and perish. And actually, that was from an experience that I went through when, at one point of time in 1990, I was working on nutrition among children, and I found that there is a survey that was conducted in 1987 by the National Nutrition Institute. I tried to get the results to compare it with recent data that was published in the DHS, and all what I found is a tiny report, but the data was not there. I mean, nobody had the data. It was on a mainframe, and then nobody thought of moving taking this to a new format, etc., and it disappeared. I think there is a lot of waste happening in the region. I'm not talking only about Egypt, but in the region. There is so many surveys that were conducted but was not preserved, and nobody can trace it now. I would like to congratulate ERF for succeeding in this mission. Actually, my experience in IDSC that people do not want to share their data. Especially if you are government, they will tell you the government is not sharing anything with us, why we should share with them. It was not very successful. We couldn't convince people to share the data with IDSC at that time. I'm also very happy that it is sustaining. It's not just an idea that continues for 1 year, but it is sustaining for so many years. I think it's great. And actually, my comments will be more on the macro level, not on specific paper. Then you can relax, Dr. Amirah. I'm going to talk about the idea of sharing data in the region, and how to make it more effective, and how to make the bridge between data and policy. And to address the issue, I think we need to think about the value chain. And I'm talking about a value chain that is similar to any industry, where you have several steps. And this is exactly what is happening as well when we talk about data from data to information, from information to knowledge, from knowledge to wisdom. And by data, this is the raw data that any statistical office will collect. And when you look at the data, you got very bored because a lot of tables, etc., and you cannot really understand what is going on and how to calculate the percentage. Should I divide on the total of the rows or the total of the columns? I mean, it's sometimes it's not very useful. Then somebody has to make the transition from data to information, and in many cases we are saying that developing countries are data rich but information poor. And I think this is not anymore in the Arab region. There is a lot of data sets that are now available, and there is a lot of so many research centers and researchers who are working on transforming this, making this transition from data to information, then by adding the context to the data. But of course, we need also to go one layer further to move from information like indicator, etc., to knowledge, and then to move from knowledge to wisdom. And here we are talking about the ferry who is going to do that, and it's not always easy. It is more technical from moving from data to information, but when you move from information to knowledge or from knowledge to wisdom, it has a lot of aspects that are psychological, they are cultural, they are political, etc., and the researcher has to go through that. But we have to understand that all the data that has been transformed to information, and most of the data that was transferred from information to knowledge or from knowledge to wisdom are very few, and it is not really serving the purpose of moving from information to evidence-based decision-making or to successful policy, public policies. And to making that bridge, we need to think about how to do that bridge, because this is not obvious. For the research community, they think that publishing a paper that is 50 pages with 100 reference and with comprehensive literature review is enough. Actually, for policymaker, they cannot really use it for any purpose. And in many cases, policymaker can read up to 1 page. They cannot read more than 1 page. More than 1 page is, you will lose them. If you are going to have messages, then avoid literature review and avoid methodology, avoid regression analysis. All those kind of things are totally irrelevant. And do like a journalist. You have to have the title first, and the title is your recommendation. And then if he is going to check your methodology and to ask you about methodology, which will never happen, probably you can go back and explain. But we have to understand as a research community that the policymaker is trusting you in the methodology. But don't try to convince them that regression is much better than cluster analysis or so. And this is not the issue. It's not the issue. The issue is to give him the recommendation that are evidence-based. I did my homework, and this is my recommendation. I think this is a trap that we are in. If I apply this to the initiative, the Open Access Microdata Initiative, is a great opportunity for ERF to play a role in that on the region. And they have a lot of good data. They have so many excellent researchers that they can do the bridge between data and information and knowledge. But the final, the last mile that they have to do it is how to bridge how to bridge the gap between research and policy. We have now a piece of research that is excellent, I would say. And there is so many papers that are produced by ERF that are excellent, and they are doing their job. I think nobody can debate that. But how to impact policy? This is the real challenge. And my suggestion is to go through this list. I think we need to have other products that are not like a paper, a full paper, but just one page. It is not an executive summary, because in executive summary you have to mention the methodology, etc. You have to go directly to the messages. And you need to think about the packaging of the product. Is it descriptive? Is it prescriptive? Is it predictive? I think policymakers want to have something that is predicting the future, that is telling them what to do. For example, in your paper, I think the analysis is excellent, but if I go to a policymaker now and I tell him, I will explain you what happened during COVID. You say, what is COVID? He forget about COVID. He forgot. But I think the important message that you can say, I did that analysis during COVID, and if there is another crisis, then I suggest that you do so and so and so, because probably all the crises they're not identical, but they are common. And if I would suggest, based on my experience, that you should do 1, 2, 3. I think this will be more relevant to policymaker than to describe and analyze what happened during COVID, because that's, for him, it's past. The second thing is to synchronize and consolidate knowledge coming from different sources. And actually what we have now in the initiative is a lot of surveys that are the part of the demand, the part of the supply, etc. There is a very rich knowledge base that we can produce, but we need to think also of other sources, and I think there is low-hanging fruits for ERF to do. For example, the economic census 2017, it is available. The census, the population census is now available in one of the American university, Philadelphia University. They have in Philadelphia they have so many census from different countries, and they have the series of Egypt for the last 12 census or so. You have data that is available here and there that you can also enrich but how to synchronize data? How to synchronize this data together? For example, the suggestion of Dr. Ali Al-Mahdi to Dr. Amirah to make some changes in the questionnaire. But if you make the change in the questionnaire and you have round 2, can you really compare? Well, changing the questionnaire and the wording of the questionnaire will make the comparison a little bit. You have some limitations. Of course, research is a way to improve the tools, etc. We have to agree on that, but we have to be careful when we compare apples and oranges, because it's not. If you change the wording of the question, then this is a different answer. Yeah. The second thing is to link economic to population, because, for example, we had an experience in the economic census because in the economic census it is on the district level, and on the population it is on the district level. So you can link these together and to see how human capital can affect or not affecting the economic performance of on the district level or on the governorate level, which might be very interesting also to create knowledge in that. Also, we need always to think about how we're going to consolidate knowledge that's coming from quantitative data and from qualitative data, because this is not always easy, and it has also to be considered by the initiative, by ERF in the initiative. The third point is to integrate knowledge from big data. And now we are in the era of big data. I don't think that after 10 years we are going to have all those surveys. Probably we are going to replace it by other less expensive source of data that is coming from big data. There is very little that has been done on the Arab region on big data. And we need a legal framework, institutional framework, to organize that, and this has not been done so far in most of the Arab countries. The trust between the statistical office and the private sector who has the big data is not there, and many statisticians reject the idea of working with big data because it's not structured, it is not designed to produce these results. It is, they think, they look at it lightly, but the facts of life that we are going to have a lot of big data that is replacing the original data that we have. Just for people who are in the room and are not familiar with big data does not mean that this is data that is large data enough. It's not, the census is not considered big data, but big data is the data that, for example, mobile operator have for all the business they have to build the consumer, for example. This is a huge data set. You can get other things from it. Maybe they are not aware they have this wealth, and maybe the analysts who are going to work for that for the purpose of development or for purpose of any other purpose do not know how to manage that and how to get this data and how to, there is a lot of things, opportunities here, and I wish that ERF have this initiative for the Arab region. We need to think about what is the added value of big data and what are the challenges, because this is not, it is not straightforward. If we are going to talk about bridging the gap between research and policy, we need to have a map for influencers. We are not talking only about policymakers who are on the government side, but also there is other important influencers, private sector, media, new entrepreneur, etc. And there is a lot of stakeholders that we need to consider, because always we are thinking about policymaker, and then at the end policymaker does not care about research. We are frustrated. I think we need to think about other stakeholders as well. We need also to think about how to communicate the results, what to communicate and how to communicate. What to communicate, definitely the business as usual policy paper that are produced are not user friendly enough, whether in terms of the length or with the format itself. It is not easy to understand from people who are not specialized in the topic. Sometimes they're not relevant, and sometimes they're not timely, because usually the research will take a year, and at that time the policymaker will forget about the problem that was there last year, like COVID, for example. And finally, we have to walk the extra mile to communicate the results, and here we are talking about how we are going to communicate it, and when and where, because it is not a matter of the what only, but also the how and when and where. How to do it and when to do it. It is like if you are playing sports, football, the timing of shooting the ball is very important. If you wait for a few seconds, you will miss it. It is the same thing. You need to have your research ready in a format that is ready, and to publish it in the right time. Because sometimes if you publish it now, nobody will think about it. But maybe if there is an event that is happening, or anything that happened next week, maybe it will be more relevant to policymaker or to influencers. It is also a matter of managing how and when and what to communicate. I will stop at this point. Thank you very much. Dr. Heba, can you allow me just for one point related to what Dr. Alia said about the quality of data and the data collection in general. I think from my point of view, it is not easy to maintain a perfect quality of data in any data collection exercise. But the important thing is to have a quality assurance system. For example, if you are doing a survey, and let us say that CAPMAS is doing the survey, why not to hire somebody else independent from CAPMAS to do the assurance, the quality assurance? whether it is a private or public enterprise, independent, just independent. And then they will take like 5% or 10% of the interviewer, and they are going to repeat those interviews and then to compare the data. If the comparison is showing that the data is reproducible and it is consistent, then you are okay. If it is showing problems, then you have a problem with the data. Usually, you are not going to have problem with all the questions, but sometimes some questions are problematic, and you will see the difference between them. And I will mention one example that happened in the 2006 census. The 2006 census was conducted by CAPMAS, of course, but IDSC did the quality control. And the quality control was based on selecting 50,000 households and repeating the interview after around 1 or 2 months by a different organization that is also governmental, but with different interviewers, etc. And we show the difference between the two, and the difference in the population estimate was more than 8%. It was there was two estimates. One of them was the lower was 8%, and that was a big problem, because this means that the 8% will accumulate over time for the next 10 years, and when you have the next census, you will find that the difference is huge. For the census will be less. The government at that time decided to move the estimate of the population gradually, so that when we reach the next census in 2016, the results are based on the actual results of the data is very comparable to what is really happening on the. There is a way to control quality or to measure the quality. There is no data that is perfect. It will never happen. But if the deviation is like 5%, 3%, 2%, it's okay. But if it is 30, 40%, then we have a problem. This is the way, from a point of view, to tackle the issue of quality control. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Dr. Alia, for your comments and suggestions. So many of them are really valid, and be sure that the next round you will be on the top of the list of people who received the form. There are, certain clarifications I'd just like to make. Of course, the survey was done by tablet, so the final form is not really the Arabic final form. That is, so the skip pattern has been done by the program of the tablet, and this, stop asking if the company was established after 2018 was corrected, not before 2018, because we have firms that were established like 50 and 40 years ago. So a lot of these issues, are not, so terrible anymore. About the industrial cluster is very important, but I do think that the questions in Module 11 will clarify this. Also, the important to keep the question on who you will bring back, I completely agree with you. But of course, you have to go back to the original employment question that gives how much they had more informal or formal, and then it can be worked out. It was just an indication of if you fired some workers, which workers would you be bringing back, or which workers did you think it was good to fire them? Like, for instance, my institution where I work in Germany, after COVID, they signed a new works agreement that we do not need to go to the office for more than 2 days a week. It was in response to COVID and to changing work and employment behavior. On the flow of the question, absolutely agree with you on lots of sections, but I also agree with Dr. Magued that we have to be careful of what we will lose. If we want to have a panel, you want to make sure some of the questions are really repeated. Yes.
You can keep the numbers of the questions.
Yes.
Fine. You just remove
the redundant ones. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Shahir or Mai, would you like to add anything?
Also from a quantitative perspective, because they have been mainly used as instruments when we want to have some causal relationship between variables at establishment and new variables or any endogenous variable later. So that's why I agree with Amirah that including variables as at establishment is important. That's for me. Thank you.
I have a question actually for you, Amirah, because while we're doing the anonymization, we noticed that there are many names. So I assume that for every module, or at least for every two or more than two modules, there were different respondents according to the module itself.
If it's financial data.
Yeah. So I believe this, in some way, increased the quality of the survey. It's not the same respondent. It's a respondent from a different department and so on, right?
And also, thank you for reminding me, sometimes it was, the form was collected over 3 visits. So the normal was 2 visits, but sometimes it took more than 3 visits to finish. Of course, I agree that it is, the length of the survey is a double-edged sword. The depth of questions and the richness of information is a benefit, but at the same time,
let's give a
respondent
chance
fatigue.
to
So now the
all of
floor,
this crowd,
yes.
Okay.
So yeah, please ask questions, and also ask to Dr. Zakaria, who did the sampling, and I think he has a lot to say about
Maybe we
how
should
he sampled.
start with Dr. Zakaria.
مشكلة العينة طويلة جدا. لو في حد عنده أسئلة معينة في السامبلينج ممكن أجاوب يعني. لأن البروسيس يعني
كل الأسئلة حضرتك
ماشي.
عشان دكتور عليا كان عندها
كذا
سؤال
ماشي.
خاص بالسامبلينج وكده.
مش هنرجع للدكتور علي.
I'd like to thank Dr. Amirah and congratulate her for such a tremendous effort to her started. I don't have questions, but I do have 3 suggestions for the next round maybe you would like to consider. The first, as far as I understood, you used the number of employees as the criteria for SMEs. You might want to consider using the central bank definition. I think that would may shift the results a little bit, especially if you consider adding other sectors. A number of employees might not be the best indicator for representing SMEs. The second is, I would really love to see other sectors represented in your sample, and so that we can understand the different characteristics of the firm, the differences between the different sectors. The last one, since we are living in the post-COVID era now, you might consider adding question like whether the firms are taking action to be more resilient against future crisis or not, and to what extent changes they made due to COVID are now permanent. It went with them post-COVID. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Heba, and I'd like to congratulate you also on the results. I'd like first to introduce myself. I'm Lubna Hillam. I'm the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. So I'm a policymaker. So my comments are really not on the methodology. I cannot comment with all these, the gurus in the room, but I would like to really concentrate on what Dr. Magued said, which is really bridging the gap between the research, the data that's collected, the effort that's done, and how this can translate into policy making. So as a former decision maker or policy maker, and although I was responsible for monetary policy, so I had research, monetary policy under my portfolio, but I definitely see that any decision maker and the influencers, and I'm happy Dr. Magued added them because they play a very important role, is really, they are a bit research adverse, and so I totally agree that you need to present your results in a very concise, in a very recommendable way. And I would also add to that, once you engage on a research or a data collection or survey, you might want to engage them at the beginning, asking them, what is it that you would like to see as an outcome, so that it really translates into policy. And I would like to give here a small example we did in the central bank back in 2000 and...
Can everybody hear in the back?
So back in 2009 and 10, we decided to do a survey because we wanted to launch as a policy directed lending for the banks to lend to SMEs. And that's where the definition came from. And we were as misfortunate as you were, because 2011, we were hit by all the things that happened then, okay? But in 2009 and 10, we did this research at the central bank in collaboration with the Egyptian Banking Institute, which was headed at the time by Dr. Hala Said. So we had the research mentality there. And we did also, although the banks came back to us and said, we're ready to lend, but we don't know who's out there. Tell us who's out there. That was their excuse. So we said, okay. So we launched an extensive SME survey. They were knocking door to door throughout the governorates of Egypt, okay? And with the help of CAPMAS. And again, we had a quality control. It was a firm, a separate, independent, private sector firm that did the quality control on the data. So everything that was said today was done, and it was really very important. And more over and above, we also trained the people that were going out to do the survey, so that they knew if they get this answer, because when you come to the informal sector, nobody will give you proper data. If you tell them how many employees they will have 10, they will tell you 5, because they don't want to pay and so on. So this survey was driven by the end benefit by the banks, although the central bank did it. But so maybe you also need to engage the decision maker or whoever you want to target, because you don't want to have your papers just lying there. You really want to see them translated into policies and things that would really change the ground. So this is my comment on that. And I think I hope you can repeat this survey again. And we had the COVID crisis, but we now are living in another crisis. So I think maybe you just need to take the right time, and the questionnaire could be a little bit changed, because the response, especially of the industrial sector to what's happening now, is really very important for decision making going forward, how to direct a lot of investment, currency decisions and policies that need to be implemented. Thank you so much, and congratulations again.
That's an excellent point. Let me just attach to it the process whereby the central bank has encouraged the banking system to make for financial inclusion. Now, financial inclusion with the small and the under 5 and 5 to maybe 20 and more, and have no access to borrowing. I think it makes a lot of sense to involve the banking system with, I'm working on the ground in 5 Upper Egypt out of 10 governorates, and we're trying to promote financial inclusion because we've done a lot of the entrepreneurship training, etc., but under our supervision with the monies we've raised, etc. But then telling them, go off and borrow and become independent, it's a very hard decision, but extremely promising. So I think financial inclusion is of the order today. Okay, other points? Fadda.
So my name is El-Hassan Al-Sabri. I am an assistant professor at Nile University. I work in the area of innovation economics and innovation policy. I'm actually quite interested in the module on innovation, and I was wondering if you've used the questions guided by, maybe some of the standards like Frascati manual or the Oslo manual, because you call the module innovation, but then your questions are about R&D, which is maybe and usually in many of these types of surveys there is always, especially in developing countries, a lot of confusion about where the limits of R&D are. So some companies consider their quality control activities to fall under R&D. Some have a much wider definition for any innovation kind of any innovation management or idea management system or whatever. I'm wondering what's your experience with this. I also don't know how many companies actually reported information on R&D and innovation. So if you'd like maybe to tell us more about how this module. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Rado Abdurraouf. I'm from the GIZ, from the Employment Promotion Project, Head of Labor Market Information. First of all, thank you very much for the thorough presentation about the methodology and the logic behind the survey. My very first question is, the results of analyzing this data, is it going to be presented sometime as part of the ERF conference? That's my first question. In order also to, reflect on the results. I think this is quite important. Just 2 comments on what Dr. Magued was mentioning. I totally agree that making use of data is really important, and presenting it in a user-friendly way is what makes the difference at the end of the day to reach out to the policymakers and to influencers. Research community is sometimes in a word that is a bit far from policymakers. We tend to work with the government, especially with the Ministry of Education, Technical Education, and also Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. And we tried in the last 2 years, together with the ERF and Dr. Rogi Assad and Dr. Karen Kraft, to make use of the data from the labor force survey, for example, in developing a digital platform that gives information at the occupation level. So, and we launched it also last March. It's basically, it's called Egypt Occupational Outlook, and through navigating through this portal, you can get to know a lot of characteristics at the level of the occupations for more than 140 occupations in Egypt, based on LFS, including worker characteristics, gender disaggregation, region disaggregation, as well as also skills, abilities, and knowledge that are required at the occupation level, the top 5, in addition to some projection of how these occupations are likely to be performing in 2030. One other point is big data. I just want to maybe draw your attention, if you're not aware, that the European Training Foundation is actually developing at the moment, they call it online job vacancy data system for Egypt, which scrapes the data that is online from vacancies that are there in all the digital platforms to give you the picture of what the online data is telling us, including data about the skills requirements, about where the vacancies are, about in which jobs, which sectors, green skills that are required, etc. Yeah, and they are actually classified according to international classifications, which is of course good because it gives the edge of comparing it to conventional data. Thank you.
Extremely important point. When we remember that Egypt, with the support of Germany, has been working on the duality system for training, industry in Egypt needs the graduates of these schools, which are more in terms of number than all of the universities put together. When I went down to Qena 10 years, 11 years ago, 12, we decided, because we had a good look at what's happening in those schools, and we discovered, to our horror, that even just sewing, cut and sew, was dismal. The machines were hidden a place that's locked up because you want to keep them in good shape. We brought the company that trains for the private sector that exports, okay? So otherwise, I'm not going to give you the, actually, who cares? Train techs, okay? They were designed to be the trainers of trainers, okay? We got them to Qina. They went through all of the 5 girls' schools that teach sewing. And I'm sorry to say, they examined those teachers and the average level was 20% on their exam because they saw it. Over 2 years, they reached 80%. Now, can you imagine the difference in productivity by doing the TVET properly? And that's after, it's at least, 20 years since we've had the support of the duality system from Germany. So it's time for all of us to be on the front line, telling governments what we want, telling them where it's not happening and why it's not happening. You want to know why the Tibet system is not working? Because you're not even sending the students to those places where they are hired or with no money will train. So these girls who are learning don't have any place to go and test themselves. Even the boys that are working on car and other machinery, they're not allowed to go to the private sector because the teacher said, you know, the قطاع عشوائي أو كده, what if they beat up the boy, will be held responsible. ما يضرب الولد يعني, المهم انه يتعلم. إذا كان هي البلية اللي هي بتتعلم كده on the ground. The boy who's going from our school will never reach the level of excellence or the income daily after 3 or 4 years at school في التibet. Very profound changes have to happen. We can't keep silent about it because it's so easy to fix. It's so easy to repair the situation. In a year or 2, I have now excellent women. We've opened up the first 2 factories in Qina for ready-made garments. It was impossible before. I know the business people, they said, we'd never come to you. دكتورة هبة مش ما نقدرش نجيلك. The situation is not inviting for me as an investor to open a factory in Qina, simply. Next.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you hear me. Thank you, Dr. Heba, and thank you, Amirah, and the team for this wonderful addition to the data sets, very much needed. And I believe the comments of both commentators is coming from real words. So these are the probably 2 people who are most experienced on the ground. So I think you need to take their comments rather seriously. I had, because I came a little bit late, I had a couple of questions about the nature of the survey itself. I understand that it has been done while Corona is in session. And usually there is a lot of research that's been done about the negative impact of Corona. I happen to believe that there is a lot of positive as well, especially for the digital transformation and for the environmental impact. Is there any question in the survey that can measure these or can give us some indication about if these impact happen in Egypt as it happened in the other country in a positive way? There is a positive impact also on a lot of issues related to the health readiness, the preparation of the hospitals and so on. and I wonder if this has been taken into consideration. The other comment that some of these impacts is a ratchet effect or rubber band effect. It shows up a certain period of time and then it goes back. And is there any way in the survey that this will be measured or proxied or whatever? And the last question, if the data is going to be available for our researcher, if they, excellent, because I think that's what they are looking for. Thank you very much, Dr. Heba.
Thank you, Dr. Enough? هترد على كله. You have 10 minutes. Any urgent addition to the questions? Okay, you can go.
شكرا يا دكتور هبة. Thank you very much for your questions and comments, and I'll try to be brief so that we go to lunch. Rama, yes, I agree with you about this, using the central bank definitions, but every researcher can use them because you have the raw data, you have the profit. Definitely. Did you ask about the permanent changes?
If you consider adding in the next round whether
Yes. Okay. Yes, thank you. Right. Thank you, Rama. This is an excellent question. In fact, also it's in line with Dr. Hassan Ali's question and I think Dr. Lubna's. Of course, we can't know from the results of this survey if firms have kept some of their practices post-COVID. But we will know if we will be running a next round of this survey if some of these practices remained. Yes. Dr. Lubna, you're absolutely right. Policymakers need to be in the loop. The problem was, of course, that I wasn't allowed to travel to Egypt because it was the COVID time, and they were also in Germany where I live. There have been restrictions, so the airports were closed. So I did everything remotely. It's unfortunate, but as the Egyptian proverb says, "ما لا يدرك كله لا يترك كله." So I believe we did the best we could given the situation and how hard it was. I trained the enumerators. I trained different teams of enumerators. Some of them fell sick with COVID, which was very sad, so I had to train another team. We did to the best of our ability. There was, of course, another team, but the company checked with another team to see about control, quality control of the data. I myself looked at things. Sometimes until now, some things don't make sense to me. But this event is about the launch of this data set for researchers to use the data as they want and as they please in lots of aspects, and then they will be the judge of how useful this data set is and how much it makes sense. Yes, about the definitions, again, I know that SMEs is in the banking sector, it's like a turnover of 50 million, which is, I would think, is a very large number, but
If you ask me now, given what's happening,
yes, it's even less.
Tying it to a monetary value for sales is not maybe the best thing to do.
Yes. Oh.
So, but I'm happy with the definition of the labor force, but you have to be aware that sometimes the numbers are not
Right.
Yeah. They lie about the numbers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. There is a measurement error and range of error. But there are, these variables are in the questionnaire, so, the researchers who will use the data will be able to tell us more about size distributions, etc. Dr. Hassan, I already answered your first question, which is quite interesting about whether effects will remain or not. The first part of the presentation that you missed was from Dr. Gadallah, who talked about how the data set is in the public domain, along with many more data sets that can be very useful. And Dr. Al-Hassan from your university is already excited about using the data set. And let's hope good things will come out of it. Radwa, thank you so much for bringing the data and the information and your results of your first project phase with Ragi into light. I'm happy to see this come to life. I remember I was sent the proposal, and I was very excited to have this platform that gives available vacancies, but also characteristics of employees in the labor market. I hope I haven't missed any of your questions. I know I missed Dr. Heba's main question. She wants results, but this is about, there was a question whether we will have another ERF event for results. I'm happy to do that event, and I commit from now. But there's so many aspects, so it depends what we want to talk about. And there will be also a book project proposal to look at productivity in the manufacturing sector, how it looks like, conglomeration, labor demand, gender, that Shahir and myself are planning to work on in this coming year. And hopefully there will be many more papers coming from other initiatives using this data set. Thank you very much.
I reserve the right to put two questions to you.
Sure.
Okay. One is about women, and women seem to be much smarter than the men as business in the businesses. Okay. On two fronts, not just one. One has to do with their access to technology, and the other one, I forget, but well, I'll go back to it, and at lunch I'll remember. The other question has to do with industrial zones, and Dr. Alia Al-Mahdi mentioned something terribly important. What is our definition of industrial zone? Because every single governorate in the south has an industrial zone, but it's not a cluster. The cluster is it's an original settlement, which may be 1,000 years old. For us, for instance, in Qina, all of the pottery, which Qina is so famous for, definitely is not in the industrial zone. It's next to the Jebel, اللي بيجيبوا منه الطينة, etc.
But nowadays, Dr. Heba,
Plus, you mentioned entire cities, which are industrial cities, that were formed in urban, on the fringe of what was urban and is now not even, it was desert and is no longer desert.
but nowadays, just a final comment, nowadays the government established one or two cluster zones, new ones. One, I guess, for textiles, and I don't remember what the other one is for. الروبيكي كانت موجودة طول عمرها بس اتنقلت. بتاعت الخشب في دمياط وبتاعت التكستايلز من المناصرة وعندهم واحدة كمان عملوا واحدة بس تكستايلز جديدة. لا يبقى دي كلاستر بقى، دي مش انا قصدي ان الحكومة نفسها are there. يعني you cannot talk about industry and just forget about the most important aspect of industry, which is the industrial specialized clusters like the ones sorry خلاص خليها في اعتبارك يعني.
Some big bodies, okay, and to us they're very important, whether ERF or ENID that I'm in charge of. They tell you, will help you with small industry if you work in the industrial zone. The industrial zone has very poor phone system, internet practically none, etc. So I think it's important to include clusters along with, or maybe they are there, but we're not aware.
May I add a final point here regarding clusters? You remember Elisabeth Cotonnet? She was a French researcher. She changed her name because she married a Moroccan or something. I don't know her name right now. But she did her PhD on industrial clusters in Egypt. And they were around 70 or 80 clusters. Remember when you were preparing the Egyptian Human Development Report, I guess in 2004 and 5, I took the data of Elizabeth and we started to look back into the industrial clusters that she mentioned, and we chose 35 of them to see what kind of services were provided to the industrial clusters, the 35 biggest industrial clusters. And the services provided, I'm talking about 2004, 2005, the services provided to those clusters that are highly specialized were very minimal. And that we recommended that there should be a branch of a bank, for instance, a branch of a social fund. At that time, it was called social fund. A branch of business development company, and so on. أنا كمان والله.
تعالى يا دكتور.
تعالى يا دكتور.
بس بالنسبه للمناطق الصناعيه دلوقتي في الجهاز
أول واحد يتكلم بصوت مسموع بالنسبة للعواجيز.
بالنسبه للمناطق الصناعيه دلوقتي بالفعل في الجهاز المركزي التعبئه والاحصاء جابوا كل المناطق الصناعيه الرسميه وتعمل لها حصر شامل وتتعمل لها عد شامل في التعداد اللي جاي ان شاء الله. يعني هم حوالي 100 وشويه الرسم.
احنا عايزين المتخصص.
ما هي هيطلع بالكامل. ما دي المناطق الصناعيه اللي هي الرسميه بتاعت الدوله.
كتير على فكرة أبدا.
هم 100 وشويه الرسم.
كتير أبدا.
بس مش ده البوكلت اللي كان
الحرف
دكتورة
لوحديها
لا
فيها
لا
أكتر من
لا لسه.
البوكلت ده اللي كان دكتور مها مجهزاه والولاد نازلين بيه الفيلد.
لا مش لا احنا جبنا من لا اتعمل له حصر شامل دلوقتي لكل المنشآت داخله سواء صناعي او غير صناعي حتى يعني هتبان ويتعمل له حصر شامل ان شاء الله في التعداد. ان شاء الله.
يعني القاهرة الفاطمية لوحديها فيها 15 كلاستر.
لا دي احنا ما بنتكلمش على الكلاستر على الكازون الرسمي كمان مش الغير رسمي. الغير رسمي عايزين يعملوه بس لسه ما بدأوش فيه.
شكرا يا دكتور. دكتور ماجد قبل ما تمشي كنت عايزه اشكرك ومي برضه تحديدا ودكتور عليا. استني يا دكتور ما تمشيش. قولي يا مي.
العربي ولا الانجليزي بقى؟ افندم. لا انا بجد يعني every time بجد I listen to your feedback ودكتور ماجد feedback I learn something new يعني. thank you for your feedback. Thank you دكتور ماجد for your feedback and ان شاء الله يعني هتناقش مع حضرتك في
Yes. Thank you دكتور ماجد. استني يا دكتور علي. thank you دكتور عليا. يعني I know you have a very large experience حتى in the ELMPS and you were part of that team. I remember حتى دكتور راجي when I was speaking to him he said there was a large team of Egyptian researchers who were looking at the application and you're definitely one of them. So about the technology question, in our paper, the gender gap has actually worsened in firms that employ technology and that employ R&D. So it's not a good thing for women because they are more concentrated in the traditional textiles and clothing sectors who are less to advanced technologies. So this is one of the sad results, even though the gender gap has improved overall during COVID. So yeah, I end at this note and I hope things will get better for gender. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.